not to leave you or to turn back from following you. For wherever you go, I will go, and wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God.
I have a personal relationship to this piece. So this fall, I decided to get married. We originally thought we were going to do the ceremony in Chattanooga. The struggle for the LGBT community and for the queer community, we're not hanging our hat on marriage equality. There are lots of things, that need to be accomplished. Marriage equality is but one, in a laundry list of ways that oppression impacts folks' daily lives. But when we started to plan and we thought everyone was going to come down to Chattanooga, we kind of kept hitting these roadblocks, and we kind of found that we were making excuses. On more than one occasion, we hit up against these microaggressions. One of us got mistaken for the wedding planner. We hit up against vendors with a faith perspective that wasn't in line and sort of was finding ourselves making excuses or starting every email with, I wonder if you're, PS for lesbians, or I wonder if you'll care, or does it bother you? Will you still, make us, our bleeding armadillo cake that we so dearly want? And also, not to mention, Tennessee didn't legally recognize our marriage, and in fact remains, on the short list of states that are not anytime, unless the Supreme Court comes down this summer and shares a different opinion, they're not getting on board anytime soon. So we made the decision to move the ceremony and move the celebration up to New Jersey, which is, like I said, my hometown. And we met with a minister. So I grew up Episcopal, and I grew up in a really comfortable and confident relationship with my faith, with my family, and in a really affirming space. And Carol grew up agnostic, which is totally blows my mind that happened in the South, but totally grew up agnostic. But I had a family friend who was a minister, and he was a Presbyterian minister, and he agreed to marry us. And we were working out the kinks of our feminist wedding ceremony, which was a really big value and was peppered with lots of Nikki Giovanni and Margaret Atwood and all these great people who are spiritual to me. And we had one disclaimer for our minister, who was a black queer man with radical politics. So he was in line with our vision. And we said no, we wanted no scripture. We wanted no mention of God. He called us up and he said, I know you said this thing, but would you consider this one scripture? And he sent us this beautiful piece about Ruth and Naomi. What stands out for me is this amazing testament to female love, right? Even if it was the relationship between a mother-in-law and a daughter, it wasn't perhaps sexual, there was still another woman willing to make one of the biggest sacrifices of her life to follow this woman who she claimed as her people. And we let it be a part of our ceremony, one of the most intimate moments of our life. And I think that conservatives have really taken on, have co-opted faith and religion to be a tool to oppress, for hate, and to oppress, and sort of, I really think, back up the ways that they discriminate against a myriad of marginalized identities. But what are some examples that maybe you see of this co-opting and sort of this wielding religion almost as a weapon?
I work in mental health and substance addiction. When you have substance, faith plays a very interesting role because it's very involved in 12-step groups. It's very involved in a lot of people's personal recovery. It can also be an item that creates a lot of stigma around different situations for people. And I work with people who say, yeah, once my boss found out that I'm in recovery, I lost my job. I see it a lot where you can't just use prayer as a Band-Aid for a lot of issues that are a lot more ingrained than, that can be very helpful, but it's not the end-all be-all.
So prayer being something that bolsters the spirit and gives you solace, right? But is in part of a treatment.
Oh yeah, I've
plan.
had before that tell me coping skills don't work. Prayer works for me. As soon as I became a Christian, it works. It's awesome. Great job. And then people who because of their faith, it has been this part where they have demonized themselves for their inability to be able to get out of a situation.
Yeah, I was raised Southern Baptist. And I also went to GPS's, which is a pretty Christian-based school, and then ran away as far as I could to Smith in Western Massachusetts, which is a highly queer-friendly space, which was beautiful. But I came back, and my question in interacting with my family, and I went to church with them on Easter Sunday just because, you know, it's your family, and it was really a hate-filled sermon on Easter Sunday. So what's being accomplished here? Like, that was my question, is because when people express hate and anger, they're answering something that's a craving in them, even if they're doing it in a really perverse way. And so I kind of sat there and I was sad for my parents that they still still chose to be in that setting. But it just made me very aware of, we all have shared cravings for tribe, you know, and so they're just creating other, right, to base their tribe against.
And so while I don't claim to have much love for the legislators that we have elected in Tennessee, but I think what you hit home about is that, like, how do you make space? How do you create dialogue? How do you have those conversations? Because your initial reaction, I mean, my gut is it's one of safety and self-perseverance, perseverance. Which is, so it's I'm gonna shut down, or I'm not going to engage, or I'm what do I have to do to get out of here intact? Our organization was really active in the Vote No on One campaign this fall. So essentially what Amendment 1 was about was, so in the early 2000s, Planned Parenthood sued the state of Tennessee and won. A lot of the legislation that they were able to pass, such as scripted consent, 48-hour waiting periods, all these things that really restrict access to abortion care. When Planned Parenthood sued and won, they were all overturned. So Tennessee remained a holdout state for a little while. So while we see states like Alabama and Mississippi have one clinic that is serving their whole state, we had 7 or 8, and that was kind of amazing. Not enough, right? There's not one in Chattanooga. We have to all drive upwards of 2 hours to an abortion care provider. So the Right to Life spent 15 years plotting and planning, and we're successful. And so literally we have this constitutional amendment that gives politicians the right to restrict access to abortion care. And they wasted no time. And so this legislative season, we've seen a lot of stuff come up. We've seen, again, the 48-hour period. We've seen scripted consent, which means and that's, literally a abortion provider, a physician is given a script that they have to read word for word, which really, gets in the way of a patient-physician relationship, When we tried to introduce something whatever you write in your scripted consent has to be medically accurate, we got shot down. That didn't float. We saw things Ashley, you kind of made me think of this and some of the other work that we've been doing around the criminalization of pregnant women and the way we have decided to treat addiction punitively. If we all agree that addiction is an illness, what other illness do we treat with jail time? Well, in the state of Tennessee, pregnant women are now, responsible for the outcomes. And what we've seen since this law has been enacted is women are fleeing, they're running, so they're not getting prenatal care, they're on the run, they're running to states like North Carolina, and it's impacting 2 populations really differently. So in East Tennessee, it's really impacting rural women, and the other largest community impacted is Black women in Shelby County in the Memphis area.
I think it's important to make sure that we don't throw all religious, faith-based organizations
Absolutely.
under the bus, which this conversation is sort of doing. Many liberal faith-based organizations are at the forefront of just the kinds of issues and social justice issues that you're advocating for. So.
No, absolutely, and thank you. That was actually kind of my segue, so I did kind of rabbit hole down that. But I think you bring up, an important part, and what I think is sort of religion has though done a disproportionate amount of the damage to healthy sexuality, to bodily autonomy, right? And so when we're talking about healing and justice and liberation, religion has to play a disproportionate amount in the healing and in the liberation. And so I think you provided a great example earlier when you were talking about kind of the shifting of the gears for the Catholic Church. And so while you were saying, they're never going to shift their views entirely, they are able to kind of redirect and say, like, here are some other incredibly important issues that we need to be working on and working around.
A friend of mine, her daughter was a lesbian, and they got married, and Eleanor could never accept it. Never. She couldn't say one nice thing. She just wrote them off. Mm-hmm. And when Eleanor got very sick, it was her daughter and her partner who were always there for her and took good care of her. Eleanor was in her 80s when she died. And Eleanor knew it was in Eleanor's wishes that her daughter's partner read one of the scriptures at Eleanor's funeral. And that was really powerful. And if we just try to have a little more patience and give people time to come to it in their own way.
It takes love.
Yeah.
And I'm a Christian. I've been in, for me, God is love. When Jesus went around healing, the Pharisees were like, what are you doing? But the Pharisees, for me, and today, are super right-wing conservatives who just stick by the law. But Jesus was like, people are sick. What do you mean? They need healing. I don't get what you're saying. In love, there's patience, there's kindness. We bear with one another. We tell the truth. We are honest, but we're long suffering. That's what it says, long suffering. Mm-hmm. And so we don't do that anymore. And if, for me, if you don't do that, then for me, it's your priorities are wrong.
Yeah.
And those are, for me, are the Christian values that are missing among Christians.
When she asked us to sort of could we get in the line of vision of Ruth, and made a couple of jokes, but none of us can, right? Because I feel for me, Ruth has her eye on the prize, right? And we can't quite see it, and we've got a lot of work to do, and they happen in spaces like this, right? Or they happen in the individual relationships that we're building to say, oh, hey, this is what a radical lesbian feminist looks like, and I can talk to her after the hunter and have a conversation, and we push our boundaries a little bit. And I wanted to end by sharing 2 examples of ways I found faith doing beautiful things in the Chattanooga community, and I would love for you all to share yours. The first is, in August. So because I'm an organizer, most of my examples come from policy and legislation, so I apologize for that. But we had a resolution on the August election to expand domestic partner benefits, and though it was lost, the faith community in Chattanooga rallied around the LGBT community from everywhere from, Renaissance Presbyterian in the west side to St. Mark's on the North Shore. They were providing space for foam making and canvassing, and they were housing volunteers who were coming in from out of Tennessee, and that was a really amazing way that they opened their doors, and much to sometimes, not to the happiness of their congregants or the community, and they got a lot of flack, but they were still bold in their support, and that's amazing. And when we were doing the Amendment 1, and we were working on the Vote No on 1 campaign, though the numbers dwindled a little bit, there were still several faith communities, that invited me to come in, and I never thought in a million years someone would invite me to get up on the pulpit and give a sermon about abortion and why it's, how it intersects with faith, but someone did. And it was really incredible and really powerful, and those same people offering spaces for phone bankers to stay the night and really doing what they could to take a little bit of that back, right? They don't have a moral monopoly, right, on these issues.